Now, I think today's session will be quite interesting. Yesterday, I was in Clubhouse. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Clubhouse, it is a new application, a social media application, where people can interact socially and people can converse about any topic via audio, and people can engage, disagree, agree, and part ways. Yesterday, it just so happened that I tuned and I found a topic that I thought was fascinating. It was a topic titled, Men Should Submit to Women. So I joined because I found the title of the topic to be intriguing. Upon entering the room, I found the conversation to be quite heated. Now, it would have appeared that before I joined, perhaps there had been opinions that had been shared, which some people felt was perhaps unacceptable. But nonetheless, I listened for about 10 minutes, and so I asked to join the conversation. And what I'd like to do is use the conversation from Clubhouse as a basis for what I believe is a very unique opportunity for both men and women to come together, to work and collaborate together to achieve whatever goals and dreams they want. I have to say that in my entire life, I have never heard women be so disrespectful towards men as I did yesterday on Clubhouse. Now, the room was being hosted by a few ladies, and their position, of which one or two of them, I suppose, but one certainly, the person leading the group, was married, or says that she was married. And her position was that men should submit to women. So on joining on stage, I give a different perspective. Now, I like to share the perspective I shared with the people yesterday, because I believe that I'm going to use that as a canvas to paint the rest of the conversation today. The word submission is a trigger word for a certain group of people. It's what I call the never word. Once you mention or you say the S word, it triggers so much emotions. And so I started my conversation by saying that I felt that the topic was fascinating. And I was asked why I felt the topic was fascinating. And I responded by saying that the word submission, in my opinion, is grossly misunderstood. In many ways, those who misunderstand the word submission are exactly the same people for which the word was not intended for. And let me qualify that statement. Submission is a word we all have heard. It's in the English dictionary. However, for those who practice and who follow either the Jewish principles or the Christian principles, shall I say the Judeo-Christian values, and who read the Bible, especially the New Testament part of the Bible, it's a word that you see a few times, especially in several chapters of the Bible. I've always had an interest in theology. And one of the things I learned when I started studying theology was something called hermeneutics and homiletics. The whole idea was that certain words were not to be read out of context, but more importantly, to understand how to interpret and how to understand historic writings in the context for which they were written. And in this particular verse, it says, wives, submit to your husbands. But the verse continues, and it says, husbands, submit to the Lord. Now, my intention is not to go into theology or religion. The point I'm trying to make is that such words in the Bible were specifically intended for believers or people who practice the doctrine of that part of the Bible. For the rest of the world, you can ignore such verses. Now, in the Clubhouse conversation, what I found to be stunning was how the word or the verse was changed. They said, well, men should submit to women. And that was the dilemma. Now, I joined and I said a few things. And I knew that it would trigger certain emotions. Before I say any more, let me explain why the title and even the suggestion is not necessarily helpful. We have, as a society, we have civilized ourselves. We've civilized the world, especially we in the West, in the developed West. We've civilized the world to the point where we can get food whenever we want. We do not have intruders trying to invade our homes or to destroy our land or to kill our family. So we have food, we have shelter, so we have our basic needs met. For those who understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that is the bottom of the pyramid. But we've gone much more than that. We've provided our physical needs, our sociological needs, to the point where we're looking for self-actualization. And I'm in support of all of that. But there is nowhere in the animal kingdom, of which humans are an extension of the animal kingdom, but there is nowhere in the animal kingdom where the men submit to the women. Now, this is where it gets colorful. The room was being hosted by Black women, American women. My first observation was, it's almost impossible to see any other ethnic group, whether you talk about the Anglo-Saxon, English or British, or the Scandinavians, or the Baltic state countries, or the Slavic countries, or any part of Eastern Europe, or Western Europe, or Canada, or Australia. And if you move to the east, Oriental Asia, or India, and all of that region, or the Middle East, there is a reverence that exists in every single ethnic minority, except the Black community, for their men. Now let me say that again. Every single ethnic community or group recognizes the importance of their men, with the exception of westernized Black women. Now, these ladies use so much foul language, so much anger in expressing their views. So when I joined on stage, I said that I'd like to provide a perspective that was very unique to their lived experiences, and that my intention was not to question their lived experiences. And I would like to take the conversation away from those on stage and to provide a perspective that was different, but also quite unique. What I said was this, that in the UK, in England of all of my friends. Now, I defined the socio-economic status of these people. I said either wealthy, high earning, highly educated, and therefore occupying a particular segment of a socio-economic hierarchy. Of 10 of those people who I know who are black, in the last 15 years, I have not seen one of them date or marry a black woman. Out of the 10, 7 are married. Of the 7, 3 are married to English women, and the rest, the 4, are married to women from the Slavic and the Baltic countries, which are part of Eastern Europe. Now, the Baltic countries are Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. So they are the countries around the Baltic Sea. And the Slavic countries are those such as, Poland, the Czech Republic, etc. And I said that I found it fascinating. In 15 years, I had not seen one of the people who I associate with date a black woman. And I was curious. So I asked the question, why? Without exception, the responses from every single one of them mirrored the next. Now, ladies, do not shoot the messenger. I think there is something to be first observed, understood, learned, and discerned from what I'm about to share. Each of them said that there were 3 or 4 reasons why they would not date a black woman. The third of those 3 items related and was connected to the issue about submission and the attitude I had seen that had been expressed by the women on stage in Clubhouse. Now, I did not share the first 2 issues that they raised. I only shared the third. I'm going to begin in reverse, starting with the third, because that was what I shared. I said that they communicated to me. Now, recognize that I am not making a value judgment. I am simply communicating what certain people made as preferences, or what they chose as their preferences and their decisions in choosing a life partner. Now, 7 of these 10 people are married, and all of them are married to European women. All of the men are black men. The remaining 3 are dating and are in long-term relationships with European women, but specifically English women and women from Eastern Europe. In reverse, their reasons. Number 1, or in reverse, number 3. The most black women in the UK are not feminine and do not have the traditional values that women of those other countries that they chose from express. Now, I'd like you to just stop and just replay what I just said. The women they chose were feminine in their demeanor, in their mannerism, in their attitude, in their approach towards them. There was something feminine about the women. They weren't aggressive. They weren't disagreeable. They had a softness to them. But most importantly, they were traditional. They understood the traditional roles of a man and a woman. For example, they could open the door for their wives, and it was something that the wives welcomed. There wasn't a competition about what you can do, I can do as well. The bourgeois values of the British, the etiquette of the men who were British that we've always expressed, they could express such qualities to the women, and it was welcomed, it was celebrated, and it was even lauded. So they were feminine and they were traditional. I said that specifically because what I had seen on stage were women who were very aggressive. Now, you would have assumed that these were men speaking on stage. The level of aggression, the level of disagreeableness, the foul language coming out from these women's mouths. I dare not say that on camera. It was appalling. There were no manners. You know, there was a time when ladies were taught etiquettes and how to behave, and the values system, and how women ought to conduct themselves, especially publicly, whether in person or whether remotely by video or by audio. Now, as soon as I said that, I triggered something else. And for the next few minutes, you could see a lot of the women, it felt as though a button had been touched. And they went on and on and on and on. Now, after a few minutes, I was asked a question, because I waited patiently. I was interrupted because I was still trying to explain what those men had communicated to me. Eventually, one of them said, "You've heard all the rebuttals and the comments from all the ladies on stage. Would you want to rebut, or would you want to say something in response to them?" Now, like I said before, I wasn't making a value judgment. As a matter of fact, I had specifically said to them that I was going to use anecdotal experiences of my friends. I did not give an opinion of myself. I did not give an opinion of what I felt they had said. My opinion, as far as I was concerned, did not matter. What I was trying to do was to say, although the sample size that I was using, 10 black men, the sample size is not significant. I was trying to make them understand, but it was representative of the wider data in the United Kingdom, of which I will go into some detail about what that data says. In my rebuttal, I said to them that I had seen that most of them had been triggered by a statement I had made, which did not involve my life experience in terms of my choices, but represented experiences of other people. But they were triggered. And they said, "Do you have anything else to say in response to the women?" So I said yes, that I had shared an observation that I had made, which I thought was fascinating. And it was telling of what I believe to be a trend amongst black relationships in the UK. So I said that in the UK, the black population in the country fall under two groups. There are those who are born British, black British, but there are those who migrated to England or to the United Kingdom, or who their parents migrated, but they have come from other countries, from Africa or from the Caribbean. And that for those two groups, that there is also a distinct, unique difference in the quality of the women. The Western, British-born women have an attitude that is markedly different from women who were either born in Africa or born to parents who were raised and born in Africa. And I said that it appears from observations that I have made, that when I've seen or met people who are not friends of mine, but who are maybe acquaintances of mine or friends of friends, that when men in the second category decide to choose a black woman to date or to marry, that they tend to go and find British naturalized citizens of the United Kingdom who were not born in the UK but have become citizens of the United Kingdom through the naturalization process. They tend to choose those women over the British born citizens, ladies who were born in the UK. And when I've asked, why is that the case? The answer is almost the same. In their response, they say that there is something unique about women who were raised in a different culture in Africa or the Caribbean, that they seem to be more feminine and traditional, whilst being enlightened from a westernized point of view. So they have their education, but they're still women. They're feminine. They're agreeable. They're easy to get along with. They know how to speak to a man. They know how to choose the right words when talking to men. They're not aggressive. And most of all, the women that they choose are not masculine. So amongst the two groups, those who were my friends or who are my friends, you see a similarity in both groups. I concluded the conversation by saying that we in the black community, we have a crisis. Because in my observation, and having studied the data, now, the Office of National Statistics provides all of the data on different ethnic groups and marriages within each group, including the level of single, you might call the level of, or the percentage of people per ethnic group who are still single. In Britain, amongst the black ethnic community, if you exclude British Africans, and here is something to understand, there is no such thing as a British African. You might have a British Ghanaian, a British Somali, a British South African, because Africa has so many countries, and each of the countries have unique cultures. So for example, Nigeria and Ghana were colonized by Great Britain. So the culture is different from the other countries in Africa that were colonized by Spain, Portugal, or France. Unique cultures. You might have countries that are next to each other, but they're different culturally. Nonetheless, anyone born in Africa who is British, you still see that they have a stripe of their culture. And in each of those countries, the women who are in England or Britain, they are still feminine and they still have those traditional values of recognizing the importance of a family unit, recognizing the importance of having a shared vision as a family, recognizing the importance and the role of the man in the family, of the woman in the family, of the children in the family, and their place within the community, whilst having all of the education that they've obtained as being British. Now that triggered another set of emotions, but I concluded by making a statement. And that is what I would like to perhaps draw your attention to. We have a problem in the black community in Britain. We have a problem in the black community in the United States. We have a problem in the black community in the West. And part of the problem can be traced down to the fact, and I will use Great Britain as an example. About 70% of all children that are raised in the black community, if you exclude the Africans who have migrated or the Caribbeans who have migrated, if you specifically look at the British-born black families, about 70% of those families are raised by single mothers with no fathers. And so, in a large part, what we are witnessing, and the reason why the two groups I refer to are distinctly similar in their summary of why they have issues with black women, is simply because most men, most boys and most girls today in Britain are not being raised in a two-parent family. So they are not being taught self-discipline, order, respect, honor by their fathers. But in addition to that, they're not being given the love that a father should bestow on a woman or on a son or a daughter. Now, I should say this. Single mothers do an exceptional job in raising their children. But let me use this as an example. H2O is 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. If I mix it in the right proportion, I get a chemical compound called H2O, or water. If I change the composition, if I decided I want equity, so it has to be H2, 2 parts hydrogen and 2 parts oxygen. I change the formula, I create a different compound, H2O2. We call that hydrogen peroxide. It's odorless, just like water, and it's colorless, just like water. One will nourish you, the former, and the other will kill you if you drink it, the latter. So we've altered what we've, for generations, considered to be a family unit, and we're seeing the consequences of such actions. Submission, which is what I started this session with, is misunderstood because it is assumed, especially by women, for whom the word was not intended. Now, submission is intended for husbands and wives. Submission is not intended for people who are just dating. That was not the intention. And like anything in life, if you do not know the purpose of a thing, you will abuse it. You will use it abnormally. And so in this situation, the women suggesting that the men in their lives, both those who are husbands and those who are not, should submit to them. What you have is an abuse of something that was designed and intended for a specific purpose. The word submission reminds me of a different word in the Bible. I've always struggled with this particular verse. It says that the meek shall inherit the earth. Now, I always struggled with that Bible verse because I always used to think that meekness was weakness. When I did some research, I found 2 definitions that I felt were more representative of what it really meant. Now, the first comes from Greek, and meek, when translated, has a word, and it defines a war horse, a horse that's been trained to be at war. That is very powerful, that is very strong, but has been taught how to restrain its power in order to allow the rider to ride the horse in order to achieve what the rider intends. That's the first definition. So in other words, it's simply controlled strength. Having power, but knowing how to harness your power and to use that power in service for something greater than yourself. The second definition comes from somewhere else, not Greek, but it translates as follows. Those who have their swords but keep them sheathed will inherit the earth. In other words, a warrior who is trained to war, to fight, and who is competent in fighting, who has power and who has the ability, decides to keep his sword or his weapon sheathed. In other words, keep it where it should be. Don't be quick to anger and don't be quick to attack, but recognize how to control the power you have and to listen and perhaps to dialogue with the intention of achieving a vision, a union that is beneficial to both parties. Now, that changed my understanding about the verse, the meek shall inherit the earth. Likewise, submission is misunderstood because most people assume, especially most women, that when they are asked to submit, that they are asked to be slaves to their husbands. I beg to differ. I believe submission is not something that is demanded from you or of you. So for example, if you are a lady and we are dating, it is wrong of me to demand that you submit to me. If I do that, then I have failed in my leadership. Submission is a gift given from the giver to the receiver. So submission comes as a gift to the receiver without the request from the receiver. However, the receiver, upon receiving the gift, recognizes his or her obligation to protect, to nurture, to provide for the giver. In other words, in submitting to someone else, you're giving them the authority that they reciprocate that power and authority by providing protection, provision, promotion, guardianship, and more. Now, where do we see this other than in relationships? We see this in business. Now, I used an example in the conversation in Clubhouse. I said, in a business, you have a CEO. If it's a public company, you also have a CFO. And usually, if it's a large company, you will have a COO, the Chief Executive Officer, the Chief Financial Officer, and the Chief Operating Officer. Steve Jobs is recognized as one of the greatest leaders and CEOs of all time. But his success came when he found a partner who could operate the business in a way that would ensure that his vision as a CEO was achieved. So Mark, the CEO of Apple today, Mark Cook, was formerly the Chief Operating Officer, and his responsibility was to make sure that the train ran on time and got to the destination. Steve's role was to set the vision. The CFO and the COO had to submit to Steve's vision. In other words, Steve was the leader of the company. The other two were equally as important because without both, the company would fail. For those who understand public companies, investors usually focus primarily on the financial statements and the notes that accompany the financial statements. And that means, as an investor, the CFO, in my opinion, is more important because I am given capital and I'm hoping to get my money back in return. And the CEO is usually not the one who leads on a financial as a financial custodian. His is to set the vision. So in public companies, the CFO is just as important as the CEO. And the COO is just as important as the CEO. Let me use a different example. You may have heard about the Trinity. For those who believe in the Trinity, it simply says Father, Son, Spirit, or Holy Spirit. Now, one of the things I found fascinating in biblical teachings was statements made by Jesus where he said, I and my Father are one. But in the office of the sent, I am inferior to my Father, the sender. In other words, in a union between a man and a woman, you have a hierarchy. The hierarchy is not intended to subjugate the woman. The man plays a role, a function. The lady submits to the institution of the union. She's not submitting to the man. The man's role is to play the role of a CEO who has a unit underneath who he has to protect. Now here's probably the most fascinating part of how we should work when done properly. If you submit to the man, however you define submission, your value is not reduced because you're transferring responsibility. A good man will recognize the gift you've afforded him, and in return he promotes you and he lessens himself. So there is a statement that the man is the head of the family. That is wrong. And ladies, I'd like you to change that concept today. That is wrong. The man is the foundation of the family. He's not to be seen, but he's supposed to support the entire family. Now, in engineering, building design, the foundation is the part of the building that you do not see, but it is the part of the building that is probably the most important part because it holds the entire structure. And if the foundation is condemned, the whole building is condemned. So when a lady submits to her husband, he goes underneath. He raises the woman so that she's the one who is seen as the head of culture, effectively as the head of the household. And he stays quiet, you don't hear the foundation, but he keeps supporting the family. So when you submit to a man, you're not doing him a favor. You're not doing him a service. You're submitting to the union or the institution of marriage for which you willingly committed yourself to. And any good man will not abuse that gift. In return, he provides a purpose or vision for the family. He ensures that he's able to provide, so provision. He ensures that he's able to protect, to promote, to profess his love, to be personable, and to pray over the family. I find it stunning why and how one word could trigger so much emotions. And I think that in many ways it's a result of a lack of the feminine nature that ladies once had and that traditional appreciation that they once shared. Now, let me say two other things and then I'll close. I made reference to 3 things that my friends said were reasons why they would not choose a black woman. I'm going to conclude with those two reasons. So brace yourself. If you are a lady, brace yourself. Now here's what's fascinating. This applies to all women, but in this case, I'm speaking about black women in Great Britain, specifically in England. The third was a lack of being feminine and lacking those traditional values. That was the third. Now let's start from number one. I will do number one and number two, and then I'll summarize with number three. The first is attractiveness. And they define attractiveness in two ways. To be physically fit and to have the right level of fitness. Let me qualify that. By fit, what they are referring to is your physical looks. Now, I've said this to so many of my female friends, respectfully, that we all are given a face. We're given a fixed height once we've gone beyond a certain age. And there is very little you can do about your height. But in basketball, they say you cannot coach height. You can't change your height once you've gone beyond a certain age. You can't change your face, with the exception of some cosmetic rearrangements. The one thing you have control over is your body. In the UK, 70 or more, I think about 80 in parts of London, of all black women from 18 and above, and from 14 and above, are either overweight and heading towards obesity. I think personally, it's a crisis. We have a crisis. We have situations whereby the men are much smaller by size, by weight, than the women, despite being much taller than the women. So they say the women are not fit. You have women who do not exercise and who do not take their lifestyle too seriously. And so they said they felt that the European women and the English women were more attractive. Now, I can't judge them. This is not a value judgment. I'm relaying information from others to you. So don't shoot the messenger. Just stop and ask the question, is it possible? Is it plausible? And is it probable? Anyone who lives in London would have to agree that on all three counts, the answer is yes. Possible, plausible, probable. The other part is fitness. And by fitness, this is what it comes down to. In the West, especially in London or in the UK, having a partner means that you have an opportunity to share experiences. And they said they find it very difficult because the women are or do not have any interest in activities beyond being superficial. They don't want to go hiking, they don't want to go swimming, they don't want to go jumping, they don't want to explore places. And all of those activities require you to be fit. So for example, because the women wear, everything is fake hair, fake eyelashes, fake nails, everything is fake. It restricts them from doing anything which should promote and support a union of two people. You take a lady out, you can't go and jump in the sea. Why? Because she's wearing a fake wig. She can't play, she can't cycle, she can't rock climb because her nails are too long. Everything is fake. And so they said from a fitness point of view, they're not fit. They would rather go on holidays and stay in nice restaurants and hotels and not explore the city. Now, that might sound very superficial. However, if you understand men, then you know that we are from the earth. We like to play with soil, with dirt. And therefore, in your relationship with your man, it's important to recognize that men have higher interest in things compared to women. Women have an interest in people. But in order for you to be worthy of being chosen by a man, you have to understand what makes him tick, what makes him excited, what are the activities he likes to do, and can you join him in such activities? So your fitness, whether that be cardiovascular or just general fitness, has to be on par with his. And within the black community, it's the worst. Now, let me say something that perhaps wouldn't sound too politically correct. There was a time when if you saw a Caucasian woman, one of the best compliments you could give the woman is to say, you have the booty, you have the body of an African woman, of a black woman. That was a compliment. Why? Because it meant that they, just the shape and the figure, you could distinguish between, her shoulders, her abs, her love handles, her hips, her thighs, her hamstrings, her knees, her calves. It was in proportion. It was in proportion. That was the best compliment you could give. Certain Caucasian women, not all, but certain. The times have changed. Let me give you an exercise. If you go online and you search for fitness models, influencers, people who provide training videos and are showing ladies how to train and how to have a unique, beautiful figure, without exception, a majority are Caucasian women. So the tides have changed. The black women have been resting on their laurels, and today, the white women, the Caucasian women, the European women, are the ones who are leading the way in fitness and being fit. It's remarkable. Now, the second thing they said was attitude. Now, women are naturally agreeable. Men are naturally disagreeable. The black men said, in choosing a partner, I want someone who is agreeable. I do not want the person I wake up next to be the enemy. Now, not my words, their words. And their reason was most black women would rather be right than happy. And it was a chore. You argue about every single thing. She wants to be as dominating as you are. She wants to be consultant at everything. Although, had she been traditional, you would have deferred to her, you would have submitted to her in certain areas, such as the home, the culture of the family, the union, the lifestyle, and in areas such as bringing home the bacon, supporting the family, providing for the family, and financial issues, she would have deferred to you, except she was in finance or accounting. But the feeling was that they're too disagreeable. Black ladies, you were too disagreeable. So attitude and temperament was the second reason. They said they're too disagreeable. They lack the temperament of a lady. They're not feminine. It's almost a battle. It's almost a war. It's almost as though you're competing with the person who is meant to be your second half, your other half. And they found that the English women, or the women from the Baltic and the Slavic countries, were still more traditional, much more attractive, much more fit. We're happy to explore in terms of adventure, and therefore we're more fit, but also those countries had not embraced this whole new wave of feminism that has corrupted some of the great women of our time, that they were still closely connected and held closely to their Judeo-Christian values. They still believed in the church and their religion, and they recognized that the man and the woman are one union, and both need each other, and that both have to work together, and that they were more happy to defer to the man in certain areas, and they were happy for the men to defer to them in certain areas. So 3 very unique, simple reasons. Number 1, attractiveness, fitness, and being fit, physically fit. Number 2, attitude and temperament, and just having the right approach, being personable, being humble, being able to cooperate, being happy to work with a man. And number 3, remaining feminine and traditional. Now, on Saturday, 2 days ago, or a day before the Clubhouse session yesterday, I went to a barbecue of a friend. And as I travelled on the tube, on the London Underground, there were 4 boys, young boys, in their teens, late teens. And they were being accompanied by a black girl. Now, you could tell as we walked just to get to the train, the boys were acting somewhat unruly. They were probably playing a little bit too much. But it was a playful act. It wasn't aggressive. We witnessed something that almost summarizes the state of most women, black women, in Britain. The girl said, "Can you guys stop making noise?" Now, she recognized that the boys were being somewhat antisocial and that she wanted them to just cool it down ever so slightly. Now, rather than ask the boys nicely, she slapped one of the boys on the head, and it wasn't a soft slap. I was stunned. I was completely stunned. The black girl slapped one of the men. The point I'm trying to make is that this new wave of feminism, we've created a society of women, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. We've created a sect of women who believe that they can be violent. Now, violence is usually associated with men. As a matter of fact, what we're finding in the UK, the violence amongst men, with the exception of those who are on the extreme, is reducing. The aggression and the violence amongst the women, the younger ladies, is increasing. And that's partly because no fathers in the family. Now, just at least you think that my intention here is just to bash the black woman or the black British lady. That's not my intention. Now remember, what I shared so far are opinions from other people. What I just shared is an observation. In the first part, I did not make a value judgment. In this part, I'm expressing, perhaps you might say, a value judgment. But just so you can see that this is not exclusive to the black race. A week ago, I went for training. And I went for karate training. We finished. In the building we train, there's a youth club. As I came out from the changing room, I noticed a young girl and a young boy playfully dancing. And as I walked past them, they stopped. And I said, "You're dancing?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "What are you dancing?" And she said, "It's kizomba." And I said, "No, you were dancing bachata." And she said, "Yes, sorry, that was bachata." Because I observed the dance and it's something I practice. It was nice to see. Now, when I corrected her, the young man, who was a black man, the woman was a young Caucasian woman, an English woman. And he said, "What is bachata?" And she slapped him on his head. I was stunned. So he walked away. The point I'm trying to make is that amongst our young women, irrespective of ethnicity or race, what we're finding particularly amongst the British Anglo-Saxon or the British black, especially those within a socio-economic role, especially the lower class, the absence of fathers has led to a situation where most of the women and the young women are becoming too masculine in their tendencies and how they express themselves. I was stunned. So within a space of a week, 2 different observations, one from a black lady, a young black teenager, and the second from an Anglo-Saxon English teenager who was white. Now the point I'm trying to make is there was a time when such acts would never have been seen amongst the British. Women were never meant to behave like that. Those were not traditional values, and those were not feminine values. So I will conclude by saying this. We have to start this conversation, and my intention in the coming sessions would be perhaps to open up this conversation so that women can join and men can join. And I might start with a 5-minute monologue to set the theme, and I let people give their opinions, because we have a problem. Men and women have to learn to live together. And most importantly, within the black community, we have a problem. Now, I should have said something. Least you think that this was an admonition towards women, black women. Let me share something else that I communicated with someone yesterday. I think this will be startling. In the UK, across every single ethnicity, you will find a black man who is married or who is dating an Anglo-Saxon British woman, a European woman, whether Eastern or Western, an Oriental Asian, an Indian Asian, a black, a Mexican, a Filipino, or a Latino. So across all ethnicities in the UK, and particularly in the United States, where such ethnic groups are more represented, you find a consistency that any one of those groups, the woman in any one of those groups would choose a black man. And in the United States particularly, the population or the representation of black men who have married into other ethnicities is relatively high. If you change the numerator and the denominator, so we then say amongst the same ethnic groups, using men as the numerator and using women as the denominator, one of the things you almost never see, and where you find them, it's a minority. One of the things you seldom see is an Oriental Asian man dating or marrying a black woman, an Indian man dating or marrying a black woman, someone from any part of the Southeast Asia, North Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, you don't see them dating a black woman. If you move to the Mexicans or the Latinos, it's very rare, although they have darker skinned complexion women, but it's almost, in the UK, in the US, is very rare. It's so rare that it's almost considered non-existent. If you move over to the Anglo-Saxon English or the Caucasian Western man, Spain, France, Belgium, Denmark, the Nordic countries, any parts of Eastern Europe, Western Europe, is almost never seen. And if you move over to what we call the developed West, Australia, Canada, the United States, the UK, it's almost an anomaly. Now that struck me as something fascinating. That why is it that the black woman is not chosen or is seldom chosen across all ethnic groups, with the exception of the black man, who happily and willingly, now I have to say something, I'm excluding Africa because Africa is a culture unto itself. It's a culture and continent unto itself. So we exclude Africa. But in the developed West, it's the black man who willingly wants to take the black woman, take her hand in marriage. Now I say that to make a point. I'm not saying the women are the problem. No. I'm saying perhaps it's time for a conversation where we hold both parties to account. And ladies, you have to stop expressing what I consider to be the acronym, a sign. I call it a sign. Whenever people like myself bring to the table what I consider to be an interesting conversation, you express what I call a sign: anger, shame, you insult me, or you call me names. So ASIGN. You make me feel guilty. And most importantly, there's almost a necessity to be right or to be correct. Anger, shame, you insult the person, you guilt me into thinking I'm wrong, and there's a necessity at the bottom to always be right. I think this is a time for conversations that must take place, because I believe we are at the crossroads. Now, one of the things I did not share is, if you go to the Office of National Statistics, now this was what I said in the Clubhouse group, that was the last straw that broke the camel's back. I said, ladies, if you look at the data, the attitude and the temperament you're bringing to a conversation or to a union is so corrupted to the point where the data says that 3 in 4 black women in the UK are getting older alone and dying alone. Now, I believe the statistics is similar in the United States, or even worse. 3 in 4 black women are aging and getting old alone with no partners, and therefore dying alone. Now, in the UK, the Office of National Statistics is similar to the CDC. So everything I've said, the information is available online. Now, I might put the links just so you can see that I'm not just spewing information. This is based on the data from the government. It says that amongst the black population, women, when compared to men, represent a higher group and have a higher number that are not getting married. Now that is understandable, because a lot of young black men, British men, if they cannot find bona fide, fit, attractive black women with the right temperament, with the right attitude, that can cooperate, that are agreeable, that are feminine, that are traditional, or with stripes of traditionality, they are choosing people from outside of their race. So, according to the Office of National Statistics, about 65% of black British men are married into other ethnicities. The reverse is not the case for the women. Now, that's not to say that women should be afraid or to say you need us. No, I'm saying we have a crisis. You have to learn to live, to work, to communicate with a man. And the time has come, I believe, where we need to reintroduce shame into our cultural and social etiquette. There was a time when certain things were not acceptable. You could see someone down the road behaving in a way that was not praiseworthy, and you could correct them. Today, with the woke agenda and the woke movement, you can't correct anyone. So most people who will listen to this would say, well, he's a misogynist, he's homophobic, you give me all the labels. You would rather be right than happy. I said at the start that my focus were for younger girls, and because that's where my hope is. Intention is to speak to the younger girls, to provide them with a message and with a strategy of how to work with the men they would love to spend the rest of their lives with. I'll conclude by saying this. I had an issue with the Clubhouse conversation for one reason. The lady who was the host was married. And here was a woman who was married speaking and asking women to request that the men submit to them. And most of the women in the room, here listening to the conversation, were single. So what you have is someone who has no skin in the game, giving advice of which she bears no consequences. And what we're finding is a lot of young girls are looking up to the wrong role models for advice. And they're using that advice in their relationships. And they're wondering why they're not succeeding. I think it's time, ladies, that you start listening to men. And that is exactly what I intend to provide in the next coming sessions. I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be controversial. But my intention, I should say, is to help you achieve your dreams and goals and to become the best versions of yourselves. We have a problem. We have a crisis. And if you were my daughter, I would say exactly the same thing to you. If you were my sister, I would say exactly the same thing to you. If you were a friend, and to those who are my friends who are female, they would tell you that I have said exactly the same things to them. Men are easy to get along with. We're not as complicated as you think. But you must first understand how to act like a lady, but how to think like a man. Now, I hope that's been helpful. And I guess this is the first of many to come. Wish you all the best. And thanks for tuning in.